Hello, everybody. Welcome to Charting with Dan. I'm your host, Dan Murrell, and thank you for joining me on this Tuesday edition. It's just going to be me today. Sorry about that. Or if you like me and you don't like anyone else, then you're welcome. We will talk a little bit about why this is on Tuesday and what our schedule is going to be like upcoming at the end of the show. But before we get to that, I want to cover what happened at the box office this past weekend, where Pixar's latest film, Onward, hit theaters, posted an opening that was a little bit lower than even the conservative expectations had thought, just under $40 million at $39.1 million. Now, that is not just a softer than anticipated opening as far as box office. When you look at the cinema score, audiences gave Onward an A-, which is on the lower end for a Pixar film. Almost every other Pixar film has received an A or an A+ from the audience. An A-, while not a massive drop-off, does seem to indicate that the audience wasn't quite as on board with this. Some of the reasons for that we're going to talk about here in a second. But reviews and audience reaction has seemed positive generally. So I think looking at this number, looking at the $39.1 million number, I wanted to break that down a little bit, look into that, why that might be, and where it falls for the rest of the Pixar films. So let's look at the openings for every Pixar film. Now, I've adjusted these for inflation so that we can get kind of a better idea of where Onward falls on that list. As you can see, starting with Toy Story, which in today's dollars opened, and its opening weekend to around $60 million. Now, this is the first weekend of wide release. There are a couple like A Bug's Life and Toy Story 2 that opened in very limited release for one weekend, then went wide. So these are the numbers for each of these films' first wide release. Now, obviously, Pixar has a fantastic record at the box office, but when you look at everything they've done post Inside Out in 2015, prior to that, none of their films really had opened below $60 million. Now, looking at Pixar's record, 4 of the last 7 have opened at or under that mark. The Good Dinosaur opened low. Cars 3 opened below $60 million. Coco opened below $60 million. And now Onward, when you adjust for inflation, is the lowest opening weekend for any Pixar film for a 3-day opening weekend at the box office. Now, if you look at the ones that have opened bigger, obviously those are sequels: Finding Dory, Incredibles 2, Toy Story 4. In addition, not all of those movies were necessarily financial disappointments. For example, Coco, while it opened lower, had very long legs at the box office and ended up making a good amount of money. As a matter of fact, other than The Good Dinosaur, I don't think any of those low openers would be necessarily quote-unquote flops. But when you're looking at Pixar, and if you're Disney, if I'm looking at the spreadsheets, there might be a few conclusions that I might start to draw. First of all, even in the opening, obviously for a while there with Pixar, all of their films were original films because they weren't pumping out sequels. So you had films like Monsters, Inc. and Finding Nemo and The Incredibles, even Cars there, if you look into today's dollars, would have opened to over $80 million. All of those movies were riding on the Pixar name. Yes, the movies themselves definitely looked interesting, but the brand itself had such a strong identity, had such a natural curiosity around it, that I think Pixar itself drove openings for so many films. Now, when you look at the fact that 4 of the last 7 of the films have opened under $60 million, the only 4 in Pixar once you adjust for inflation to do that, I also don't think it's a coincidence that 3 of those 7 are original ideas: Onward, Coco, and The Good Dinosaur, meaning they're not sequels. And Cars 3 was never a huge financial performer for Pixar. Incredibles 2, obviously. Finding Dory, obviously. Huge follow-ups, long delayed follow-ups, or at least there's a long gap between the first movie and the second movie, to hit movies from 10 plus years earlier. So if I'm Disney and if I'm Pixar, one thing that I might be looking at is the fact that, when they started, they were one of the only games in town when it came to prestige computer animation. Now, so many other studios have started making headway in that space, including Sony with Spider-Man, Into the Spider-Verse, even films on Netflix, other studios that have their animation divisions running, like DreamWorks, Universal, obviously, with the Despicable Me films. There's so much more competition now in that same space that I think even the brand name of Pixar might not still have the same buying and selling power as it used to. It's gone from Pixar itself being a brand to Pixar perhaps leaning a little bit more on its own brands, like The Incredibles, like Finding Dory / Finding Nemo, to sell tickets. Now, does this doom Onward to a financial failure? No, it does not. As I mentioned with Coco, the movie opened at around the same level as Onward did and went on to have a very successful run at the box office. However, Onward has a few things working against it. Number one, it is in a very competitive part of the year. As we go into March and April, we're heading into the summer movie season, or at least the build up to it. Also, there are very real world concerns about the coronavirus, COVID-19. Which theaters will be open? If the theaters are open, are people going to be wanting to go out to theaters? As we've mentioned before, the theaters in China remain closed. Throughout Italy, they are now on a complete countrywide lockdown, and we are seeing what appears to be this week an escalation of cases here in North America and the United States. There have already been today a report of a little bit tighter security measures in certain parts of New York. There is an instability toward the box office that does not exist. This is a very unique situation, not only here in North America, but worldwide, where we don't know what the movie-going situation will be in the days and weeks going forward. So it's tough to project what this means for Onward and what this means for really any other release, because we honestly don't know what the road ahead holds. So while you can draw perhaps a few guesses as to this opening for this film and what it can mean for Pixar and Disney, there are a lot more variables to this situation, including how many people stayed home this weekend, even though there was no advisory necessarily for a wide audience not to go to the theater, not to go out publicly. Those advisories now are starting to trickle in little by little. Will that affect this film? Will that affect the movie business in general? It already has, as we've talked about on the show, worldwide. I think looking at Onward, it's going to be hard to take lessons about this movie and from this movie, because we really don't know what the variables are going to be affecting its performance going forward. Now, the one thing that it does bring into question, or I think that we should start looking at, is other films that are opening, not just this weekend, but in the next few weekends. As this situation develops, I think we're going to see more and more studios trying to figure out what the best path forward is for those films. We've already seen one film, My Spy, which was supposed to come out, has now been pushed back a month. The studio citing concern over the marketplace. Will that become widespread? Is it possible that in a week or two there are no movies being released, including Mulan, which is another one coming from Disney? Only time will tell. We are in uncharted territory, no pun intended, as far as what's going to happen with the box office. So the best that I can do, and I think the best that everyone else can do, is to stay safe, to stay alert, to listen to the advisories that are coming from the health authorities. And as far as the box office goes and the movie business goes, yes, it's going to hurt in the short term, but in the long term, the thing that's the most important is the health and safety of people around the world. So obviously, I will continue to track the story from a box office perspective, and everyone should continue to track the story from a human perspective as we unfold what's going to happen in the days and weeks going forward. But Onward, week one in the books. What this means for the film going forward, it's anyone's guess. Let's look at the rest of the top five before we look at openings around the world. The Invisible Man there at number 2. Kind of fighting back against the perception that a lot of people stayed home from the theaters this weekend, because it held more like a drama than a horror movie. We talk about on the show all the time that horror movies often will fall 60 to 70% in their second weeks. The Invisible Man actually held pretty strong, dropping less than 50% in week 2. That may indicate that perhaps interest just wasn't necessarily there for Onward, because there were people showing up to go check out The Invisible Man in its second week. The Way Back debuting at number 3. Not a great debut for the film. However, it had a lower budget, under $30 million, so it doesn't have quite as much of a hurdle to clear if it wants to make its money back. And then Sonic the Hedgehog and The Call of the Wild, 2 holdovers, rounding out the top 5 at number 4 and number 5. Let's look at the top per theater average, and it is a movie that I was disappointed to learn today was not about a cow being elected president. First Cow, $20,000 in 4 theaters around the country. First Cow is from director Kelly Reichardt, whose previous films include Wendy and Lucy, Meek's Cutoff, Night Moves. It's about 2 guys who come up with a business scheme that involves a wealthy man's cow. It's one of those movies. A24 is distributing, because of course they are. This sounds exactly like the kind of movie that A24 would be interested in. Really solid reviews. Audience reviews a little more mixed because, again, A24. But First Cow takes the per theater average for this weekend over $20,000 per theater. Let's look at the top 5 internationally. So these are the films, the box office everywhere outside of North America, not including North America. Onward was the #1 movie in the world with $28 million, followed by The Invisible Man with $17.3 million, Sonic the Hedgehog with $12 million, The Gentleman with $4.9 million, and The Call of the Wild with $4.8 million. Again, the COVID-19 crisis has escalated in outside of North America much more quickly than it has inside the country here. So there's really no telling how these numbers were affected, but gatherings in public places have certainly been affected more so far internationally than they have here, although we'll see how that stands after this week. So let's look at the top 5 worldwide. This is every country in the world. Onward debuts at #1 with $67 million. Invisible Man, the #2 movie in the world with $32 million. Then Sonic the Hedgehog, $19.7 million. The Call of the Wild at $11.5 million. And then The Way Back, which actually didn't make a whole lot of money internationally, is in the top 5 due to its North American debut at the #5 spot. Let's look at what the year looks like domestically so far here at the box office. Bad Boys for Life, the top 5 really all staying the same. Invisible Man jumping up 1 spot as it cracks the $50 million mark. As a matter of fact, it's close to overtaking Call of the Wild both internationally and domestically at the box office, despite the fact that the budget was far lower on Invisible Man. And then you have Onward jumping onto the list at #7. The Gentleman drops down 2 spots, followed by Fantasy Island down 1, Like a Boss down 1, and the very first film that was on the 2020 U.S. domestic box office charts, The Grudge, after 9 weeks, drops out of the top 10. Looks like Bad Boys for Life is going to be entrenched in there for a little bit as Sonic the Hedgehog continues to make money. Don't really know if it's going to catch Bad Boys, but we have some other films. If the movie-going business is not affected further by COVID-19, we could see some films, including Black Widow, some other ones coming out in the next couple months, take over that top spot. Let's look at the 2020 worldwide box office so far. Bad Boys, Sonic, Dolittle, Birds of Prey, and The Gentleman remain at #1 through 5. Call of the Wild almost breaking $100 million worldwide. But then, as I mentioned, The Invisible Man jumps up 3 spots. It's almost at $100 million worldwide on a reported budget of under $10 million. Onward jumps onto the list at #8 with $67 million worldwide, followed by Tanhaji, which drops down 2 spots, and Tolo Tolo, which drops down 2 spots. Tolo Tolo, an Italian film that actually made quite a bit of money before the coronavirus escalated in that country, which is now, as I mentioned, on a lockdown. And as with the domestic box office, the worldwide box office also loses The Grudge after 9 weeks, which was there for the starting in week 1. So there was a little comparison that I wanted to do because I've talked about how the worldwide box office has been affected, really starting with the fact that China closed their doors over Chinese New Year weekend, and the fact that now theaters around the world are starting to be affected more and more. So this is the 2020 worldwide box office through March 10th. Or actually, I should say through March 9th. And as you can see, the lowest grossing film at $50 million. We have 5 films that are over $100 million. Let's look at what the box office was doing this time last year. So this is the 2019 worldwide box office. And I think you're starting to see the effect of what this crisis has had on the box office worldwide. As you can see, at this time last year, all 10 films in the top 10 had grossed over $100 million, and 3 of them with Pegasus, Crazy Alien, and The Wandering Earth. All of those came from that Chinese New Year box office window. We had the debut of Captain Marvel at $500 million. We had How to Train Your Dragon, which had made $400 million, and Alita, which had made $300 million. You can see the strength of the worldwide grosses, even on the movies that are lower in the 150 to 130 range, and what has been lost thus far at the box office worldwide in 2020. Can we make up that ground? It's entirely possible. But with the open-ended aspect of this crisis, the question is going to be how and when will that ground be made up potentially. But that is, if you look between the two, a pretty staggering difference as far as top to bottom, how much has been made and how much has been lost. we would have seen obviously at least 2 or 3 probably films just from the Chinese market on that list, as well as probably an international gross from China for Sonic. So much thus far with the box office that has been lost, and that could continue to be lost as the virus sadly escalates throughout the world. The good news being that it seems like, at least from the reports that have been coming out, that the virus is slowing down its spread in China, where it began. Whether that remains the case, we'll see. It as something that nobody wants to rest on their laurels, and obviously we want to hope for the best, but this will continue to be a huge story, not just as this virus is spreading, but as the box office and the economies really of all these countries begin their recovery. So this is we're in kind of a weird position here, because obviously we've been doing this kind of a fun gag here for the last several weeks about the countdown to New Mutants, because New Mutants has been delayed so many times. As you can see, here it is at 25 days. But we're still going to continue the countdown. Want to lean a little bit, not as much into it, however, because, obviously the world is unpredictable. And we never could have thought when we started, Lon and I, this funny little bit, that there could be a time where the release of New Mutants is actually now possibly in jeopardy, depending on what happens here in North America and the world over the next couple of weeks. So we're going to continue doing the countdown, but it just goes to show you how weird life can be sometimes. It started as a joke, but we also don't want to make light of the fact that movie's release, as well as many other movies' release, may actually be up in the air depending on how the next couple of weeks turn out. So presuming that hopefully business is able to keep going as usual, we'll continue the countdown, but we will also see where we are this time next week. As far as what is coming out this week, we've got Vin Diesel in Bloodshot. We've got The Hunt, which was, speaking of a movie delayed, this was a long delayed film, or not long, but a few months, that was pushed back for concerns about its content, seen by some as a political satire, seen by others as inflammatory. That finally hits this weekend, as well as I Still Believe, which is from Lionsgate. It's a movie as we're getting into the Easter season. We're in the Lent season right now, aimed toward a Christian audience. That comes out this weekend as well. And as I mentioned, I'd say a little bit about what the path forward is for charting coming up. So as you may know, if you watched Screen Junkies Universe this morning, out of an abundance of caution and to make sure that we are doing our part to prevent the potential spread of the coronavirus, Fandom has decided to encourage its employees to work from home whenever possible for the next little bit. We're not exactly sure how long. What that means for this show is that, as with Screen Junkies Universe, we're going to be in here on Tuesdays doing live programming, but also pre-taping a bunch of stuff for the next several days, so that the staff does not have to come in if they don't feel like they need to, and so that we can have programming banks should things worsen and the need to stay home escalate even more. So what this means for charting is that I will continue to do charting. However, for the next few weeks, it will be on Tuesday, hopefully, and this is everyone's hope. If we could all snap our fingers and it would happen tomorrow, this crisis will abate and we can resume life and work as normal as soon as possible. However, we also have to understand that you have to adjust to the circumstances of the world that we live in. And right now, more than anything, I think that the thinking is that we want to do everything we can to make sure that we are doing our part to keep this virus from spreading and to protect ourselves, to be quite frank, from the spread of it. So charting will be on Tuesdays, but we're still going to have it. I don't know who's going to be able to do it with me, but I will definitely be here. We'll be back next week to talk about it. And, a lot of times the message that I give is confined to viewers in North America or viewers worldwide, and I love that people from so many different places watch the show. Unfortunately, this is a message which I think can be attributed to pretty much anyone watching and anyone around the world. But stay safe. Keep your ears out for information from public officials about what you should do. And I think that one of the small benefits of something like this is it does show the capacity of people to work together against a common cause. So stay safe. Thank you for watching. I will be back next week to break down The Hunt, Bloodshot, and everything else, along with the latest updates from the box office, both domestic and worldwide. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.